Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. After months of protests leading to the resignation of Guatemala's former president, Otto Perez Molina, Guatemalans headed to the ballot box to elect their next leader this past Sunday. There are 7.5 million registered voters in Guatemala, and according to the Organization of American States Electoral Observation Mission, the elections were a success, with 51.8% of eligible voters participating. But with no clear victor winning the majority of the vote, three candidates will most likely be squaring off in the next round. Now joining us to help us understand who's who is our guest, Andrea Ixchiu. She's a journalist with Prensa Comunitaria, and she joins us now from the country's capital, Guatemala City. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrea.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Great. So let's just start to unravel who these candidates are. Let's start off with Jimmy Morales, who won most of the votes, but not enough to avoid a runoff. In the American press, Andrea, he's sort of portrayed as this TV comedian that came from really poor background, became a small business owner, and really pulled himself up by his bootstraps, as they say here in America. What interest does Jimmy Morales represent, and which voting bloc supported him in this election?
Well, Jimmy Morales, as you said, he works on TV. He's a comedian, but he's surrounded by a very, very dark military elite. The people that represent an organization that it's named Avemilgua, which has a lot of people that was part of the genocide and the war crimes in the early 80s. All of them reunited in this organization to take care about all the legal demands against military commandos. And they were putting a lot of pressure over the media and the public opinion in between the genocide case. They do protests to defend Rios Montt, and all of them are vinculated in some way to the war crimes. So as you can see, maybe Jimmy Morales has showed himself as a poor candidate, like as a fresh and new face in the politics in Guatemala, but he's surrounded by a very old military elite that has been leading in another spaces. They found in the early 70s the political party called the MLN, which was the political party that was named itself the political party of the organized violence. Which is also the same political party who was hosting the new president of Guatemala, Maldonado Aguirre. So we can see those networks moving and reorganizing themselves to keep themselves in the power, and especially to protect themselves against trials for the human rights violations during the war. And in another fact, we have seen how the biggest media in Guatemala was supporting Jimmy Morales on his last days of campaign, especially because all of them began a big campaign against one of the candidates, the second place one, Manuel Valdizon. So they start pushing Jimmy Morales in the top of a lot of the public opinion programs and pushing him to as the possibility to be chosen. Mm-hmm. So we have seen that also as a part of all that strategy, the biggest media and also the military forces that he's moving around him.
Great. Let's talk more about Manuel Valdizon, who you mentioned. I also want to bring up him as well as former First Lady Sandra Torres, who both had slightly over 19% of the vote. Now, these two candidates most likely are going to be going against Mr. Morales. What interests do they represent, and how do they differ from Mr. Morales?
Well, we have said that they just represent different interests in the way they do business and which part of the economical elite that they do represent. We can see as Jimmy Morales part of the economic elite that is part of the military forces. We can see Manuel Valdizon as part of the elite that leads the organized crime in Guatemala. Like a lot of people has denounced him as being part of criminal structures connected with drug cartels and also paramilitary forces. Then also we have connected Manuel Valdizon during a lot of investigations that had been posted by a lot of other media in Guatemala as also part of a lot of small business that are connected to bus travel agencies and like new economical powers. So he's not represented the traditional economical elite. As then Sandra Torres, which has with her as a vice president one of the men that belongs to the traditional economical elite. So in some way we have seen how the right power in Guatemala, the elites are reorganizing themselves to be part of the government.
Yes.
And that's what we are seeing. There's no opposition force. There's not even a revolutionary movement.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because to me it sounds like there isn't much of a difference between these candidates. They're, like you said, represent the interests of the elite, but there was just so much frustration out there on the streets, and it seems like it's quite palpable in Guatemala that people are sick of the status quo. So why do we have three leading candidates that all represent that status quo, and there hasn't been a real challenge to them? Did voters not have any strong challengers outside of this political elite in this round of elections?
No, I think that's one of the saddest parts of all of this. The protests were demanding not just the resignation of Otto Pérez Molina and Roxana Valdetti. The march and a lot of the protesters were asking for some political reforms in some of the most important laws in Guatemala that can actually change the way that the elections were happened, that were supposed to be changed, not just the political parties, just changing the rules so more popular forces and movements can participate in the elections. But that doesn't happen. So we have seen that it is true that there's like a success in the name of the observers named this election, but we haven't seen too how the people that doesn't go to vote or that annulate their vote or they leave their vote in blank affect these elections. Like we have seen there's 8 million people in Guatemala that has been registered to go to vote, but just close to 4.5 million went actually to vote. So that means that there's like a big population in Guatemala that doesn't go to vote and that is not happy with these elections and the way they came out after all these political scandals of corruption. And well, the saddest part is that we don't have enough time, since we have seen that there was a legal possibility to change the rules during April 25th to September 6th. And people start struggling to make the Tribunal Supremo Electoral to change the elections times and dates, but they didn't want to change it. And they also received a lot of pressure from the U.S. Embassy.
So, Andrea, hold on to that thought, because in part two, I really want to delve into the role of the United States in all of this. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this interview.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.